All right, guys. So I want to talk about what's happening over in France right now because although I'm no expert in French politics, it seems like what Emmanuel Macron is currently doing is one of the most undemocratic things that I've ever seen. So here's the headline from The Guardian. They say political chaos in France after Macron refuses to name a prime minister from a left-wing coalition. So if you guys remember, it was about a month ago or so, back in July, where I covered these election results from France. Now keep in mind, this was a snap election that Emmanuel Macron called. So he wanted this election to happen. And the results were, I guess, somewhat surprising because the left-wing parties were able to very quickly form a coalition that ended up winning a plurality in the National Assembly. So these were the final results from this election. The New Popular Front, or the NFP, a broad alliance of leftist and environmental parties, they won the largest number of seats of 188. Now, if you look up here, you can see that the National Assembly's total seats are 577, meaning that you need 289 to make up a majority. So obviously the leftist coalition, they won a plurality. They did not win a majority. But then you go down. The Ensemble, the centrist coalition led by French President Emmanuel Macron, came in second place with 161 seats. And the National Rally, or the RN, and its allies, led by far-right leader Marine Le Pen, won 142 seats. So these were the final results. Nobody won an outright majority, but clearly, very clearly, the leftist coalition under Jean-Luc Melenchon won the plurality in this election. So you would think, if you lived in a democracy, that the prime minister position would go to somebody representing the winning coalition here, right? The left-wing coalition. Not according to Emmanuel Macron. So here's some of the details. They say France has been plunged into further political chaos after Emmanuel Macron refused to name a prime minister from the left-wing coalition that won the most parliamentary seats in the snap election last month. The president had hoped consultations would break the political deadlock caused by the election that left the Assemblée Nationale divided into three roughly equal blocks, left, center, and far right, none of which has a majority of the seats. After 2 days of talks with party and parliamentary elite leaders to break the stalemate and allow him to name a prime minister with cross-party support, Macron's decision to not choose the New Popular Front's candidate was met with anger and threats of impeachment. So he is explicitly saying at this point that he is not going to choose a prime minister from the New Popular Front bloc, the winning coalition from the election. He's not going to pick their preferred candidate, basically outright refusing to accept the results of the election. Now they continue. They say a government formed by a left-wing alliance of the New Popular Front, comprising France Unbowed, the LFI, the Socialist Party, the Greens, and the Communist Party, would lead to an immediate vote of no confidence and a collapse of the government, Macron said, explaining his decision. He also said, such a government would immediately have a majority of more than 350 MPs against it, effectively preventing it from acting. In view of the opinions expressed by the political leaders consulted, the institutional stability of our country means that this option should not be pursued. So to translate what he's saying here, guys, my question would be, so why the fuck even have elections in the first place? Why are you pretending as if there's some sort of a democratic outcome from these elections? If you get the result, you don't like the result, and then you basically just turn around and say, well, even if we put somebody from the New Popular Front to be the prime minister, their government would effectively be opposed by the majority. I guess he means making up of the RN, the far-right party under Marine Le Pen, as well as centrists from Macron's own coalition. Is that what we're saying? We're saying that we cannot have a ruling coalition from the left because they would be overwhelmingly blocked from doing anything by the center and by the right. First off, what does that say about your coalition? What does that say about your coalition? And also, again, what does it say about French democracy that the current president, right, who was just rejected in the last elections just a month ago or so, he was just rejected. The status quo was rejected, right? Clearly, the French people wanted something else. Primarily, they wanted the left-wing coalition to be more represented. And your explanation for why you can't allow them to have the prime minister's position is because you think, well, the rest of the elected officials will be overwhelmingly against them. So then why have the elections in the first place? Why are we even pretending that this is a democracy? I mean, this is completely insane to me. Maybe there are some people in my audience who are French, who maybe know the French political system better than me, but this seems just so beyond the pale to me that it's laughable. It's laughable that you would use that as an explanation. But they continue. They say, after the announcement, the NFP said that it would not take part in further talks unless it was to discuss it forming a government. The ad hoc left-wing alliance saw off the threat of the far-right national rally in the second round of the July legislative election. The coalition gained the most seats in the 577-seat assembly and has said any new prime minister should come from its ranks. Yeah, that's how democracy should work. Whoever wins the most votes, whoever wins the most seats, should probably get that kind of representation. No, am I crazy here? Am I crazy for thinking that should be the case? I mean, who else are you going to nominate? Is it going to be somebody from the second place coalition, the Emmanuel Macron coalition? Is it going to be somebody from the Marie Le Pen third place coalition? Of course, it should be somebody who comes from the coalition that just won the fucking elections. Why is that complicated? Why is this difficult? And by the way, as a reminder here, it was because of that quickly formed left-wing coalition that Marie Le Pen did not come immediately to power. They were the ones who were responsible for staving off the rise of the far right in France. It wasn't Emmanuel Macron. It was a combination of maybe the left-wing coalition and the Macron coalition, but it was primarily the left-wing Melenchon aligned coalition that prevented the rise of Marie Le Pen in the way that they did. And how is he rewarding them? By saying, we're not going to allow for a prime minister from your coalition. It's completely insane. Now they say the NFP has put forward Lucie Castetz, a 37-year-old economist and director of financial affairs at Paris City Hall, as its candidate. After Monday's announcement, Jean-Luc Melenchon, the LFI president, accused Macron of creating an exceptionally serious situation. He says the popular and political response must be swift and firm. He says the LFI called for demonstrations urging the president to respect democracy and said that it would present a motion of impeachment of Macron. And that seems entirely reasonable to me. He also says the president of the republic does not recognize the result of universal suffrage, which placed the New Popular Front at the top of the polls. Now we have another quote here from one of the Greens who said that the president's action was a disgrace and a dangerous democratic irresponsibility. And it's hard to disagree with them, right? I mean, this is Macron just outright refusing the results of the most recent election and basically just saying, well, I don't really like them. I don't really like their coalition, and we would all band together with the far right to block anything that they wanted to do. So we can't allow them to come to power in the first place. It's like they just won the elections. What are you talking about? You can't allow them to come to power. That's not your call. That's not your right. You don't have the right to just ignore the results of the election because you don't like the outcome. That's not how this shit is supposed to work, right? Now, to hammer this home, in terms of the justification that is being given by Macron's allies, here we have Arnaud Bertrand, who I think is fantastic when it comes to French politics. And he says this: what Macron allies are saying to justify his moves is some of the most undemocratic stuff I've ever read. It's frankly beyond unreal. So this is Francois Bayrou. I might be butchering that name. Bayrou, a very famous liberal centrist politician who's a longtime supporter of Macron. So Arnaud says, first of all, he rejects the fact that there was a winner in the election. Here's the quote: those who claim that there was a winner in this election know very well that they're talking nonsense. What is this? What is this? Who's the winner here? Are you guys struggling to tell me who's the winner here in this election? He says there's no such thing as a winner, right? He says it's not true. His interpretation of the election result is that it says, quote, French democracy cannot be led by an absolute majority of the far right or the extremes in general. I'm sorry, what? He says, when the votes, factually speaking, said that the exact contrary, what he calls the extremes, in other words, the New Popular Front, the left-wing coalition, and the, not even going to try to pronounce that word accurately, the RN, the far-right coalition, gathered 63% of the votes, right? 37% for RN and 26% for MPF, and have 56% of the seats in parliament, 31% for NPF, and 25% for RN. His own group, Macron's political coalition, got 23% of the votes and 26% of the seats. So what the French very much said with their vote is, we're fed up with the political center, fed up with Macron and his ilk. We want democratic change, not business as usual. Transforming that somehow into, the French said that they didn't want to be led by the extremes, and therefore implying that they want to keep being led by the center, is beyond unreal. And again, he's 100% correct. Listen, you could look at these results in, I guess, a number of different ways. I don't see how you get past the fact that the NFP coalition under Melenchon won the plurality of the seats. I don't know how you just skip past that. But look at these results and then understand that Macron and his allies are trying to say that we cannot allow these guys up here to take power because these election results somehow show that the country doesn't want to be led by the far left or the far right. It's like, okay, you combine both of these together, that's a majority right there. So you could confidently say, I mean, with Macron's centrist ensemble party and his coalition, that if you guys won only 28% of the seats, then the country is definitively saying, we don't want the status quo, right? Either we want the far left, right, the so-called far left under Melenchon, that's number one, or maybe we want to take a chance with the far right. But there's no possible world in which you could look at these election results and say, yeah, the French people wanted the status quo. They wanted the exact same of what they've been getting. There's no possible way to interpret the results as that. But that's what Macron and his allies are trying to say. So he continues here. He says, so what's Bayrou's proposal? That's the most insane part. He says, quote, there is only one thing to do in my eyes. The president of the republic appoints a prominent figure to form the government. This figure proposes a team, and this team does not ask for prior agreement from political parties since it will never obtain it. Huh? So, in other words, he proposes to completely bypass the democratic process. Macron chooses a new prime minister, obviously somebody who he likes, and does away with the inconvenience of asking Parliament for their agreement, because if he did, they obviously wouldn't agree. How, as he asks here, how would that not just be a coup? How is this not a coup? So the French president, Emmanuel Macron, gets to just arbitrarily decide who he wants to be the prime minister, completely disregarding the election results from just a month ago. He gets to completely disregard the democratic will of the people. He gets to appoint somebody who he likes or somebody he thinks may be a loyalist, and they get to move forward from there without any approval from the government, without any approval from the parliament. Is that not a coup? Is this not the most undemocratic shit you've ever heard in your life? I mean, let's finish off here. He says, lastly, he explains why Macron shouldn't appoint an MPF prime minister. And this is where you get to the quiet part out loud aspect of this. So he explains why Macron shouldn't appoint an MPF prime minister, which should normally be the case, were Macron to follow democratic rules set by precedent. The PM is normally and logically appointed from the group with the most seats in parliament. That's how you would think it would work, right? But he says that the main obstacle for the MPF bloc, which claims victory, they didn't claim victory, they won. Okay, they won the most seats. That's not in dispute. But he finishes off, the main issue is its program. So there you have it. That's it. The Macron and his allies are outright admitting that the main issue with this current standoff that's happening here is that Macron and his allies in his coalition, they don't like the leftist platform. That's what this is. They don't like their policies. They don't like their program. They don't like their plan for the future direction of the French country or the French people. And so therefore, they are going to ignore the will of the French people. They're going to completely throw out the last election that just happened and appoint somebody else. I mean, again, guys, I'm no expert on French politics. Maybe there's somebody in my comment section who will explain this in a way that makes sense. But from reading what I've saw so far, this is insanity. This is utter insanity. Now, I wonder if the US will have anything to say about this, right? That you have a ruling president completely disregarding the results of the last election to potentially appoint somebody who he sees personally to be more fit for the prime minister's position, ignoring the will of the people. What will the US say about this? Will we react in the same way that we react to Venezuelan elections or Chinese elections or Russian elections? Or will we respond in the same way that we did with, let's say, Pakistan's elections, a close U.S. ally that engaged in the most obvious election rigging that I've ever seen in my life during the last Pakistani elections, where the U.S. did absolutely nothing about it when Pakistan ousted Imran Khan, right, and cracked down on any of his political allies in the country? What will the U.S. say to this? You're just completely disregarding an election, completely throwing it out the window. Well, because I don't really like their program. I don't really like their policy agenda. I don't really think that they could effectively govern. So we're just going to ignore the will of the people. Complete and utter insanity.
Politic guy has the best politics. Believe me, no one does it like him. Believe me, everyone is saying